All stations. This is the United States Coast Guard. Monday, the 29th of October, into Thursday, the 1st of November. High winds and high seas expected to accompany the storm. This is the United States Coast Guard out.
Mass transportation is.
These places, I know
More complex mass transportation is flooded with 86.
It became real for all of us when the subways were out, when there was no gas at the gas station, when entire communities were decimated. The reality of sea level rise and flooding for this region became very real to the entire population.
I was surprised a bit by the impact that Sandy had on New York. The city was less prepared than I would have guessed simply by my experience in the Netherlands. So I was not as much surprised about the strength of the wind, even the surge of the water that was all forecast. But I was surprised by the impact it had on the communities.
There's a half a dozen governmental commissions. There's conferences, there's workshops, there's all sorts of things going on.
So then the question is, how do you rebuild? What do you rebuild with? Are there parts of a neighborhood where you just can't even in that context?
How do we redevelop and rebuild stronger and better and smarter than before?
What do we as a city do, given what happened during Hurricane Sandy and given what the future is like?
The big buzzword in New York City is what's called resilience. Resilience is kind of a planning tool that New York City has embraced. And what does that mean? If there is damage to personal property, to buildings, to infrastructure, then it can be repaired quickly. You put the most vulnerable infrastructure out of harm's way by building walls around things and raising them up, but you don't expect to be able to protect everything. I call this a kind of the local solution. In other words, it's like patching potholes in the highway.
We never just should rebuild, we should pro-build. Rebuilding would be just going back to the same vulnerability that we had before. Pro-building is to build in safety and mitigation in terms of infrastructure, which is the lifeline of a city. We do not have much options other than to and pro-build in place.
I've been promoting the idea of storm surge barriers, European-type storm surge barriers, which I call a regional solution that would protect a lot of this at-risk infrastructure. This is a conceptual design by the Dutch engineering firm Arcadis to a storm surge gate system across an entrance to New York Harbor. These vertical gates go down to block the harbor. This is looking from the ocean, so the ship is going into the port of New York. The gates close, the surge is coming from behind the viewer, and it's blocked by these gates and the barrier. So this is the area we're talking about. The proposed location for the storm surge barriers is between Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and Breezy Point, Long Island. But the barriers will have to be extended by building up sand dunes to protect these areas, and all the way around here up and to protect Kennedy Airport, which is right there.
Storm surge barriers would be actually quite good to keep the storms out, but what they are not good is to keep the rising sea level out. New York City and the metropolitan area, as well in New Jersey and adjacent areas, are part of an estuary where several rivers go into the Atlantic Ocean. When the sea level reaches somewhere 5, 6, definitely 10 feet, then even in low tides, when the barriers are open, portions that we now call usable land or parts of the city will flood, just like they flooded during the 11-foot storm surge during Sandy.
We're going to need to do something with the shoreline. The climate change projections suggest like a 6-foot sea level rise. So that would basically cover up all of Battery Park City. So one of the things our MoMA project suggested was, raising the shoreline by 6 feet. People see the fuzzy green edges, but they don't see the engineering that's also part of this. If you actually can interrupt the wave or the period of the wave further back, then the splash is going to happen back here instead of happening right at that bulkhead edge. The position of the Bloomberg administration seems to be to rebuild harder. And I think the reason they're saying that is they've spent a lot of time rezoning all of these waterfront areas for high-end residential properties. I think they also understand that in some areas there are people that have been in these neighborhoods for many generations, and they have a real emotional attachment to these places, and they're beautiful places, and it's understandable. But you have to sort of weigh the costs of actually staying in those places.
I feel like since the media attention has slowed down, that Staten Island's being forgotten about, it seems to us. Seems like people don't realize that all these homes, 176 homes, people aren't living in them right now, that they're all displaced, living with friends, family, in hotels.
Often the powerful use their power for their benefit, and the less powerful are not at the table when it comes to negotiating the solutions. So social injustice or environmental injustice is a big issue. All one can say is that the poorer communities have to organize themselves so they have a seat at the table. That has to some degree taken place, but the others, they don't have to sit themselves there. They pay their politicians to do the job for them.